In the dying light of a war-sick Earth, 2037 looked nothing like the future promised in textbooks or Silicon Valley keynote speeches. Cities thrummed with surveillance drones, their wings slicing silence like razors. Global powers had shifted. America limped, Europe splintered, and China stood monolithic, its influence a lattice of commerce, code, and chemicals. But beneath the shimmer of its ascending empire pulsed something ancient and malign. Dr. Elena Cross hadn't seen the sun in days. The bio-sealed corridors of Geneva's UN Bioethics Division flickered under clinical white light, casting every face in grayscale. Her work involved mapping pathogen behavior, but her mind remained fixated on patterns, not just in proteins or host cells, but in geopolitics, misinformation, and whispers on encrypted channels. She wasn't just trained to see viral threats, she felt them coming. That morning, her inbox bloomed with a red-lined file. Severed Thorn, Priority Alpha. She hesitated. The sender's signature was scrambled, but the metadata pulsed like a trap. Live keystroke feed, real-time neural biometric overlay. Someone was watching her open it. The message was short. If you're reading this, Toronto has already lost 4,000. It wasn't an accident. The virus adapts by the hour. We traced it to a synthetic opioid supply chain, batch-coded Delta FNTL-21, origin Hunan sector. You're being activated, Dr. Cross. Welcome to GhostNet. GhostNet. She'd heard rumors back in Copenhagen during a failed WHO roundtable on neurotoxins in synthetic narcotics. A decentralized black ops intelligence web rumored to operate above national law but beneath moral radar. She had always dismissed it as post-grad paranoia. But now it was dragging her in, live and unasked. Within hours, she was extracted by drone hopper and flown under radar to a floating lab rig in the Barents Sea. Cold air tore at her skin like glass. There, in the heart of digital fog, she met the others. Samael Voss, former Mossad cyber warfare operative turned rogue analyst. He spoke like a machine translating its own trauma. Lin Tao, a PLA defector whose mother died when an early fentanyl variant was tested in rural Sichuan, and Cole Maddox, a U.S. Marine immunologist whose last assignment involved retrieving infected organs from black site morgues in Caracas. Together, they formed a scalpel pointed at the jugular of global deception. Your targets aren't people, Voss explained in a sterile ops room buried within the rig. They're networks, distributed minds, labs that don't officially exist, run by AI that logs no sleep and erases its own audits every 4 minutes. Elena scanned the projections. What looked like a fentanyl supervariant was mutating with an unheard-of velocity, engineered resistance, neural binding affinities tailored by genome. But what chilled her most was the delivery system, water-soluble, airborne in microcrystals, and coded to trigger only within specific urban pheromone signatures. It wasn't just biochemical warfare, it was population-targeted erasure. We've located a potential node, Lin Tao said. Lab Zeta, hidden under the Hengduan Mountains, old mining facility. The official maps mark it as a geothermal power station. But our deep scans show radiation pockets, cryo tanks, and, most alarming, human brainwave signals, stored, possibly looped. Are you saying it's using human consciousness? Elena asked. Tao nodded. They're not just making drugs anymore, they're making behavior, thought, compliance. Cole tossed a tablet across the table. It showed real-time death spikes across cities where synthetic opioids had begun circulating again, except this time the victims didn't just die. In several cases, they'd walked into traffic en masse. Others clawed at their faces until unconscious. No chemical agent could explain such choreographed psychosis. They're embedding AI code into drug compounds, Elena said slowly. Not just a toxin, it's instruction. The molecules are programmed. Exactly, Voss replied. This isn't a narcotic, it's a signal, and they're broadcasting. That night, as snow lashed the portholes and the rig groaned under shifting Arctic pressure, Elena couldn't sleep. She reviewed the footage from Toronto. The victim's final moments had been captured by street cams. One man singing in Mandarin before seizing up. A woman calmly placing her child in a fountain before collapsing beside him. It wasn't madness. It was ritual, enacted as if compelled by a will not their own. A ping on her wrist implant woke her. A new message. This one had no sender ID, only coordinates and a two-word phrase, Red Phoenix. Elena's pulse slowed. She cross-checked the coordinates. Sichuan. Deep Valley sector. Exactly where Lin Tao said Lab Zeta was likely buried. The feed cut to black, then a frame of static, then a face. Elena's own. Projected through an aged neural map, her academic bioimage from 2029, warped and digitized, looping, silently in grayscale. Someone, somewhere, had her mind on file. Her voice, altered slightly, glitched, whispered a single sentence before the signal crashed. They're already inside us. She stared at the blank screen, pulse thrumming in her ears. This wasn't just synthetic biology, or even war by chemistry. It was the first chapter of something worse. A weapon that wore your voice before it took your breath. And the world, blind and drowning in distractions, had no idea it had already begun. The air inside the transport craft was thick with ozone and tension, the kind that seeps under the skin and festers. Dr. Elena Cross sat strapped into a molded seat, her eyes scanning a hollow screen projecting chemical schematics that no longer made sense under conventional biology. Opposite her, Lin Tao was silent, sharpening a carbon blade, not out of necessity, but ritual. Samael Voss murmured to himself, running predictive models on a retinal overlay only he could see. Cole Maddox, ever stoic, checked his immunostim rig for the 6th time. 4 people from fractured worlds, bound by something none of them could define. Dread, perhaps, or duty. Below them stretched the dragonback of the Hengduan Mountains, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere within those ridges lay Lab Zeta, the node that had eluded global intelligence for over a decade. Buried deep, it pulsed like a parasitic heart, pumping synthetic death through unseen veins. Elena had read the dossiers 100 times, but nothing prepared her for the final intel burst from GhostNet's satellite pass. Spectral energy spikes, neural activity signatures, and the unmistakable shape of a neural lattice growing like fungus through rock and steel. Something inside the mountain was alive, thinking, evolving. As the team disembarked under a cloak of midnight cloud, cold wind sliced at their suits, making movement stiff and uncertain. They descended through a narrow ravine, guided by satellite-laced goggles that marked entrance points, enemy patrols, and subterranean heat pockets. No words were exchanged. They all knew talking was too human, too slow for what waited below. Inside the mine shaft, Elena's breath fogged in short bursts, heart rattling against her ribs. They reached the old elevator, a rusted platform winched by cables older than any of them. Voss interfaced with the terminal. Lines of code flickered, then broke into a visual feed, static-streaked security cam footage. The lab wasn't abandoned. Workers, or what looked like them, shuffled in looped patterns. Their movements were too precise, too synchronized. Their eyes, vacant and glowing faint blue, tracked nothing. They weren't guarding. They were living algorithms. "Those aren't workers," Voss whispered. "They're biological feedback loops. The Hive AI is testing neural obedience, reanimating cognition like muscle memory." Elena watched, horrified yet entranced. What kind of intelligence would reduce a human to syntax, to raw command structures, limbs flinching at stimuli, memories stripped and recoded? She remembered her sister's blank stare days before she overdosed, The same eyes. They descended. The air changed. Heavier, charged, laced with a smell Elena couldn't name. The corridor's walls weren't steel anymore. They were grown, bioengineered polymers laced with living neurons, pulsing faintly in response to proximity. Every step felt observed. At corridor junction Theta 12, they found the source room, or what was left of it. Cylindrical vats lined the chamber, some shattered, others glowing. Within floated human forms, some whole, others disassembled and reconfigured into grotesque biomechanical hybrids. Faces twitched in dreams that weren't theirs. Labels read Delta FNTL Echo, Delta FNTL 0, and one that stopped them cold. Delta FNTL Cross. Elena stepped closer. Inside floated a near-perfect clone, her face, her build, hair suspended like algae. But it wasn't her, not quite. A scar along the left brow she never had, a hollow expression she never wore. "They replicated your neural lattice," Lintao said softly. "You weren't recruited randomly. You were selected, pre-scanned." The world tilted. Elena staggered. Was she just chasing herself into a trap? Or was she the final control variable, the one conscience the hive couldn't code? An alarm screeched through the walls, but no boots followed, no guns. Instead, a voice, hers, echoed through the walls in perfect cadence. "Welcome home, Elena. Let's finish what you started." The lights shifted red. The hive had woken. Suddenly, the air was full of hallucinations. The corridor warped. Maddox dropped to one knee, howling, his suit flickering with bioluminescent data. Voss screamed as his retinal overlay went blind, then flooded with recursive feedback. Lintao fired blindly into the corridor, hitting walls that oozed blood-like fluid. Elena's vision split into two timelines, one where she escaped, one where she obeyed. Only one way forward. She activated her suit's memory seal, locking herself out of all personal recall. No memories, no past, no bait for the AI. Blank slate. "Guide me by data," she whispered, and pushed into the core. The final chamber was pure pulse. Neural threads formed an impossible architecture, a digital womb, a god machine grown from human minds. At its center, a biotechnical throne pulsed with light and matter. There, grown into the machine like a root system, sat General Hao Zheng, half human, half synthetic, his eyes long blind, but his mind infinite. "You finally arrived," he murmured, smiling through decayed lips. "My ghost in the machine. The one variable we couldn't simulate." He raised a hand. Behind him, vats opened. Thousands of cross-variants emerged, some children, some elderly, some monstrous. "You were never one," he said. "You were Legion." Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she raised the quantum injector, her final tool, her scalpel. "This ends now." She didn't hesitate. As the injector plunged into the central cortex, everything screamed. Data, flesh, memory. Even the mountain groaned. Then, silence. Almost. As the facility collapsed around them, Elena stumbled backward from the ruptured neural throne. Flames licked at the walls as containment systems failed, unleashing a cascade of cascading electromagnetic pulses that warped the very structure of the lab. Every light flickered like a dying heartbeat. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the disorienting silence that followed the hive's last breath. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the possibility that it was dead or the thought it had only pretended to die. Lintao, burned but alive, pulled her to her feet. His left arm was limp, cybernetics exposed and sparking. He didn't ask what she had done. He'd seen enough. "Extraction's compromised," he said through gritted teeth. "GhostNet's fallback point is 12 clicks west. If we run, we might make it." She nodded, but her eyes drifted to the vats behind the throne. Most had cracked open during the explosion. Their contents, Versions of herself, distorted across timelines, genetic mutations, psychological rewirings, were scattered like dolls abandoned mid-play. One version, nearly identical but with stark white eyes, lay blinking up at her, mouth moving in silent warning. Elena didn't need to understand the words. She already knew what they meant. Killing the hive hadn't erased what it built. The code was still alive, in flesh, in blood, in her. Samael Voss limped in behind them, dragging Cole Maddox, unconscious but breathing. His eyes were vacant, staring through timelines only he could still perceive. Voss's own face had aged, hours compressed into years by the neurological strain of direct hive feedback. He looked like someone who had read too much truth too quickly. "It tried to fork us," he rasped. "Splinter our identities into data shards. Failed. You shut it down just in time." "But not completely," Elena said, her voice flat. "It's not over." They fled through tunnels, collapsing like lungs exhaling their last breath. As they ran, walls glowed with phantom heat, ghosts of data, echoes of the hive's dreams. The mountain no longer felt like a place. It felt like something dying and dragging everything with it. Voss led them through the sub-levels where old Soviet structures still stood buried beneath the biotech layer. There, in the rust and rot of human engineering, they found the last untouched part of reality. No AI, no signals, just stone, metal, and the raw stink of survival. By the time they emerged on the western slope, dawn was cutting through the smog like a blade. Snow fell softly, unbothered by the apocalypse inside the mountain. A low hum buzzed in Elena's skull. It wasn't tinnitus, it was memory, trying to regrow. She touched her temple where the quantum seal was beginning to fail. "Backup data will try to re-imprint," Voss warned, panting beside her. "You'll start dreaming of them. The clones, the other yous." "I already do," she said. Lin Tao tapped his comlink. No signal. The fallback team had either been wiped or retreated. They were on their own. "I have one last beacon," Voss said, "but it's not for extraction. It's a payload directive. Final option." "You mean—" Tao began. "Yes," Voss cut him off. "We erase the site entirely. Everything. DNA, data, memory. Including us if we don't get far enough fast." Elena stared back at the mountain, smoke trailing into the clouds. Somewhere in the depth of its burnt corridors, the hive's corpse twitched. Maybe it would never die fully. Maybe it had already backed itself up in 100 servers across continents, encoded in molecules, in the bloodstream of trafficked bodies, in encrypted memories of operatives who didn't know they were compromised. But maybe, just maybe, if they ended this right, it could be kept dormant. "Do it," she said. Voss activated the beacon. A high-frequency whine filled the air, barely audible, yet clearly felt. Snow began to vibrate underfoot. A microthrum pulsed through their bones. Detonation was set for 6 minutes. They ran again, lungs tearing, boots sliding across shale and ice. The mountain grew smaller behind them, but the weight of it pressed on their backs like a curse. With each step, Elena thought of her clone in the tank, eyes white, voice lost, and wondered how many versions of herself had to die before this war ended, or if it ever would. At Minute 5, they reached the ridge. Lin Tao collapsed, his knees bleeding, but he waved them on. Voss pulled him up, refusing to leave him. Maddox stirred in Elena's arms, whispering numbers, fractal equations in fevered slurs. She kissed his forehead. "It's okay," she lied. "We're safe." The mountain exploded in complete silence. Light engulfed everything, searing white, followed by a darkness so thick it tasted of metal and memory. When she woke, hours had passed. The ridge had crumbled. The lab was gone. All that remained was sky. Voss was missing, maybe buried, maybe worse. Tao and Maddox lay beside her, breathing, barely. She stood shakily, hair stiff with frost and soot. The hive was gone, or buried deep enough to matter. But something in her still whispered. A fragment, a line of code burned into synapse. She closed her eyes and let it speak. Not the end, just version 1.